Amy Nicholson. That was Fire of Love. And
yeah.
Woo! Editor Erin Casper.
Woo!
Thank you so much, Amy. And again, forgive me, everybody. I really lost my voice. This is Erin Casper, our phenomenal editor. I just want to give another special thank you to Frank Marshall for hosting the screening.
And I have to say, you have had an amazing year, the two of you. It was exactly a year ago this week that Fire of Love was premiering at Sundance Film Festival. It won the Jonathan Oppenheimer Editing Award. Congratulations for editing. And now received the nominee for Editing Award. It's wild, and I'm so excited to talk about this film with you because you have made a film that is about science, that is about people who dedicate their lives, literally their whole lives, and deaths in the end of this film, to science in the pursuit of like finding out how can we use science to better human lives, to protect human lives. And yet you're a film about science that these characters you've chosen to study, you know, that you have Katya Maurice Crafts. The fact that these two people with the same obsession grew up in the same area, managed to find each other, fall in love, go on this adventure together, it makes me feel like your film is a science film that also feels about mysteries and fates, destiny. Does it feel that way to you?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. Actually reminds me of something. We had the pleasure of having dinner with Frank just now, and we were talking all about the magic of serendipity. And how serendipity is almost like the medium for documentary film and filmmaking in general. But I feel like serendipity, for example, Katya and Maurice being born 20 kilometers apart, just a few years apart, loving and studying the same thing, being drawn together. That's serendipity, but it also feels like fate. And the overlap there is that when you have like kind of a clarity of purpose, the way Katya and Maurice did, there's something that feels like a fatedness to all the accidents, if that makes sense. Because they were so close to death in a way, that gave them a sense of knowing what was deeply meaningful for them. And thus they were guided by this intuition that I think brought them towards each other. I don't know if I'm a believer in fate, but I do believe in the sense of looking deeply for meaning and purpose. And Katya and Maurice, I think, are the best examples of exactly that. And that's how that was a guide in our story. But yeah, what would you say in relation to that?
I would say also, I was actually just listening to this really great Ray Bradbury interview today, talking about why man goes to space, and I think that in it he talked about many things, but he talked about science as being oriented around mystery, you know, and I think that really ties into this story because, you know, Maurice and Katya they were scientists, but their guiding principle was always going toward mystery, and you know, and in our process that was the case for us as well.
And there's serendipity even in how this documentary came together because you originally thinking you wanted to make a film about Siberia, and then a pandemic happened. You found yourself instead doing a story about a different type of natural disasters, people living and coping with natural disasters. You came across 250 hours of footage that the Crafts shot about their work. I kind of want to know, Katya, tell me, like, as an editor, what was your reaction the first time you saw just some of these unbelievable things they recorded? People walking on lava, people in silver suits in front of like walls of flame, people cooking eggs on volcanoes.
It was truly overwhelming. We got the archive from Images in batches. They were scanned reels. And you know, we have a number of ways to describe it, but sometimes it really felt like somebody swept up Katya and Maurice's cutting room floor and pasted the shots back together and put them on hundreds of reels, and then locked them away in a closet. And then like we opened that closet, you know, and like it was just noisy and busy, and it wasn't just 250 hours. It was thousands and thousands of shots, and all sort of strewn across time, countries, you know, geography, years, you name it. And so it was overwhelming, but it was also just this incredible challenge and treasure hunt for us to sort of make sense of it, make meaning of it, you know, make it and pull story out of it as well.
Yeah, just to add, I remember the first times we saw the footage, and it was just absolutely beguiling. It's like, what are these shots? They seem so otherworldly, so surreal, that it taught us so much about how Katiemri saw the world. And they saw the world, and I guess the world to them was utterly alive and powerful and sentient. I remember some of the very first shots that I came across were shots of Mauna Loa erupting in 1984, and there were close-ups of the bubbling lava. And I remember in the log notes that I was writing at the time, just saying this feels like a monster. This feels like alive. This is the most enchanting monster you can imagine. And there's this palpable sense of love radiating from behind the frame. And that taught us so much, not just about volcanoes, but about, again, how Katiemri see the world. And that was such a guide for us in making sense of the noisy closet Erin is talking about, is that love, that sentience, that power, that really served as a prism through which we interpreted the material.
Well, and how they saw themselves in it. Because when you watch this footage, you're like, okay, Maurice is a bit of a prankster. He likes to zoom on people's butts. But also, they seem to spend some of this film, some of the running time, almost acting like they're scientists, pretending to be scientists for the camera, kind of play acting what they're doing. How could you tell when they were being themselves and when they were being high drama versions of themselves?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'll start with please jump in. I think that they were always being authentic versions of themselves. There's just a multiplicity of themselves. The performer Katiemris were true Katiemris. It was just a different tool to getting people to understand kind of their mission in life. And that mission really was bringing people into their love of volcanoes, and thus that being a conduit to understanding the mysteries of the planet. I think they really understood that they themselves were very savvy storytellers, and if they could get people to connect to them as these playful, silver suit wearing, red cap donning, likable characters, then that could be an invitation to connecting to what they loved as well. So I feel like it was part of their arsenal, so to speak. Arsenal's maybe the wrong word. I want to find a word that's a love metaphor rather than a war metaphor, but it was in their toolkit, so to speak, in terms of engaging with people. So I really think they were all versions of themselves. It was just one kind of facet or face that they would share. What would you say?
I was going to say they were always authentic and then also high drama.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Especially on talk shows, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And they, I think one of their greatest skills, and I think this is true of scientists like Bill Nye, for instance. They were such incredible communicators. They possessed the ability to take really complex ideas and mysteries and communicate that to mass audiences, and I think that's what artists do as well. They communicate very complex things in a very simple and accessible way, for people and draw them in. And so I think that's just a part of them. It's maybe something that they can dial down from time to time, but it's innate.
Yeah, and just to add, they were students of myth. Aside from the scientific knowledge that they accumulated and conveyed, they collected hundreds of stories of volcanoes from around the world. And they really understood that a myth is a story that can expand time and persist throughout time. And they knew that they themselves were pretty much mythic characters. The fact that it was kind of an Icarian way of living, getting so close to the thing that ultimately took their lives, but that was, again, what was most meaningful to them. And I feel like this is something we talked a lot about in the edit room, was this idea that they were almost inscribing their own story through the camera to create a myth about themselves, knowing that any moment could be their last. They had to set their story to posterity through the camera because of the dangerous way they lived. And I feel like that comes through as well, and was really a rich source that, again, guided us kind of in the structure and the storytelling of the film.
Well, yeah, about that structure, you make the decision to tell us really early on that they die. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what made you decide to make that narrative choice?
There was a lot of reasons. It actually came on pretty early in our process. After our first assembly, the next cut we had the admission that they passed away. For us, one of the reasons that drove that decision was the fact that we wanted the audience to not necessarily wonder about their death, to ask oh, this shot looks insane, are they gonna die here? Oh no, are they gonna die here? That creates a crowded sense of narrative space. And we instead wanted to open up that space to instead concentrate on how they lived, because that's really what this film is about, is the meaningful ways that they pursued their passion and what it means to live a meaningful life. The other thing too is that it was so important for us to situate the audience in understanding that what you're watching is the materials that they left behind. There's something really rich and beautiful about doing that, and we had to establish they passed away in order to give you that understanding of that grammar. Another facet was the fact that this is a film where time is a major theme, and noting at the beginning that they will pass away in 1991 and that tomorrow will be their final day, that kind of sets the clock in a way that kind of pulls into focus perhaps the precarity and the fleeting nature of human life set against the enormity of geologic time and the lifespan of a volcano. So all of those things were a lot of considerations and why we wanted to do that.
Yeah, and you know, just adding to that, I think it wasn't really a question for us for very long. We talked about it, you know, before we really did anything. Before we touched a frame and started editing, we all gathered for a weekend after we had looked through the material. Maurice and Katia wrote 19 books and that we all read and listened to all of their interviews, and we got together over a weekend to talk about some of the big picture ideas and questions that we had, you know, moving forward into the editing process. And one of them was like, when do we bring up that they die? You know, and it really was only just one cut where, like, I think we had it at the end, but it's just without it, it was like having a ship without a rudder.
Yeah.
You know, and so it wasn't really giving anything away to, you know, show our hands and tell you the ending of the film. You know, it made it in pretty much right away. And from then on, it was just never really looking back.
I mean, did any of the footage that you saw feel like, to you as filmmakers, like a gauntlet being thrown down? Like, I am a curious person, but am I willing to do that, to go there to get the shot?
You mean in terms of like the lengths that they went? Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, my jaw was on the floor constantly. Like the shot where you see Maurice like running across the lava flow in Hawaii, it's just like, oh my God, is he really doing that? And there's multiple takes. That's one of the things, again, going back to this idea of their performance. There's so many takes of Maurice doing that, and I remember there's one specifically where at the very end he hops off and you can see a smile on his face, and it's just like he's loving this, and it's incredible, and it's like, of course Maurice would do that. Did I do that to get the shot? I'm not sure. Probably. I don't know, actually. I've never been in that situation. I can relate to the feeling of passion, though, I should say. That utterly infectious drive to getting what you find most beautiful and most exciting. So while I've never been tasked with that, I can relate to the sentiment. What about you? Would you do it?
I found myself holding my breath a lot, you know, and no matter what, you know, it's just like, oh God, are they gonna make it? What are they doing? You know, especially like a scene like Acid Lake, where it's just like, I think my palms are sweating thinking about it right now, where it's just like, they're gonna get on that dinghy and they're gonna go across the lake and get stuck. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, just like reliving it every time, you know, it's just so heart-stopping to me. But I think I have a similar, you know, relate similarly, you know, where especially, you know, Maurice often talked about, you know, one of the most dangerous things about being a volcanologist is that you lose focus of what you're doing because you're just so awestruck that you can actually just drop your tools and your instruments and stop paying attention to the things you need to be paying attention to in order to stay alive. And I related to that a lot and thought, you know, yeah, I would be a bad volcanologist in that way too, you know.
I sort of want to take an audience poll of who would run across lava. But I'm nervous I'm going to be calling anybody up that feels like they have to run across lava to prove it. One person. Congratulations, sir. I'll help you with your obituary. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the stylistic choices you guys make. I want to talk about the music, which I think the music you selected is just amazing. Like it goes from kind of pop ballad here, touch of the Ennio Morricone, there's some rock and roll in there. You really use music so well to set a tone, and I'd love to hear more about that, especially in the choices where we're listening to some cool tunes, you take us underwater to watch some lava explosions, the music gets muffled, and we really feel like we're there.
It was really important for us to have a score that we called retro-futuristic, which we, again, all of our choices are really guided by Katia and Maurice and the way that they style themselves. You know, often as in these kind of kitschy sci-fi B-movie kind of aesthetic, and you see that really with their like silver helmets in the 70s and whatnot. And so we wanted to embrace that in the music as well, and so we called it kind of retro-futuristic or gazing at the future from a vintage past. And so we were thinking about music that could do that, and we ended up working with Nicolas Dosa, who is one half of the duo of Erin, which is a French band from the most known now in the 90s and 2000s that really captures that kind of playful vintage feel. But we really see Fire of Love as a collage film, and so we wanted different textures to come together to create this unique whole, and that meant bringing in different types of music. For example, music that was really popular in the 60s and 70s when Casper and Maurice were coming of age to contextualize the backdrop to them falling in love, as well as kind of being playful and cheeky with the Ennio Morricone. But when Erin was editing, I feel like music was the glue to holding together so much of like the blender of shots that you talked about.
I would say too that music, just like sound design, is such an emotional component, or really the beating heart of a film. I mean, of course, we just couldn't have asked for more powerful imagery, but these reels of images that we're talking about had no sound, and so no sync sound whatsoever. And so, in a way, like music became an even more vital component because it was just like, okay, well, in terms of like sort of digging through all these needles in a haystack and like pulling out the right shots for each scene, it was also about like, what really sets the tone in these scenes and these sequences, and like what puts you in Katya and Maurice's perspective, and music was such a big driver of that, and we had a great time, like really picking and working with Nicolas' score, and really like constructing scenes so down to the frame around to music.
And how did Miranda July get involved? Or I guess even more to the point, when somebody like Miranda July gets involved as your narrator, do you then start shaping narration to fit something that sounds like something Miranda July would say?
We actually, from the very beginning, did not want narration for Fire of Love. We wanted the Cross archive to speak for itself. However, for us, we realized that what felt like the truest interpretation of their legacy, well, I should back up and say, there's hundreds of films that you can make from their expansive legacy and all the materials that they left behind. But for us, through our research, we really believed that a love story, but more specifically a love triangle, felt like the truest interpretation for us. Part of that was because of a sentence in a book that Maurice wrote where he says, "For me, Katya and volcanoes, it is a love story." And that now is at the end of the film, but for us it was really a genesis point, and that's taught us kind of how to cohere this collection of footage. And if we were going to do that, we needed another narrative vehicle to tell the love story, because the imagery didn't actually contain any conventional imagery of romance. There's no shots of them on dates, holding hands, kissing, anything like that. But we realized that the truest actual form of romance for them was these erupting volcanoes. Like, that was the only thing that could capture the same kind of passion that they had for each other and for their life's mission. But we needed narration to contextualize that. The French New Wave was very influential for Casper and Maurice, and that's something that shows up in their own work. Most notably in Maurice's, really fun snap zooms in his camera that many people today associate like with Wes Anderson, but it's very much a hallmark of the French New Wave. And so since that influenced them, we thought we should also embrace it. And kind of a playful, subjective narrator is another one of the hallmarks of the French New Wave. So guided by that kind of drove our writing process in terms of situating the love story. But in terms of who was going to voice that, we had many questions and many different ideas. The very, very, very beginning, we thought maybe Bjork, and then we quickly thought, no, someone French. And Jocelyn, one of our other editor, French is her first language, and she voiced our narration for a while, did an amazing job. But in a brainstorming session, one of our executive producers, Greg Boosted, suggested Miranda, and we were just instantly like, yes, Miranda would be perfect. And we felt like we had actually been writing for her all along. Mm-hmm. A lot of that is because she, as an artist, for those of you who aren't familiar with her, possesses such a keen ability to observe kind of human relationships. Whether it's like the kind of fleeting beauty of just meeting someone in the hall and like fantasizing a whole world with them, or like your life partner who you walk with for many, many years. She's so good at kind of at articulating and communicating the feeling of kind of this strange beauty of love. So she was kind of an ideal narrator who could bring the sense of yearning and curiosity Yeah, what would you say?
I also would say too that she had this warmth in her voice where I think the narrator, we wrote a whole backstory about the narrator and who this person was before, we, and it landed on this lightning bolt moment of Miranda July. And when Miranda paired her voice to the images, it was just as we had imagined, where the narrator was somebody who didn't know them but regarded them as friends, and was very curious about them and wanted to show you, the audience, about them, and as the narrator was learning as well. And that was something that was so magical about hearing Miranda's recording finally versus everything that had clipped in terms of what we had always envisioned and talked about, and then pairing it with Miranda herself.
I have so many questions I want to ask you. I think I'll stay for when we all cross the street in a second to go to the reception at the Colbert Hotel. I want to ask you if Wes Anderson screamed when he saw this and said, "I can't believe that y'all found the craft first." I want to ask you what you think they were at the Oscars, if they're still here. I want to ask you all of this, but I think I'll just ask you as my last question before we can celebrate your film and your Oscar nomination is, I imagine you both learned a lot about volcanoes making this film, but what did you learn about people?
Oh, such a great question. Or do you want me to get the other? I could spend a very long time trying to answer that. I think I would say that I feel like there's a kinship between humans and volcanoes, specifically when it comes to mystery and love. I really feel like love can be as baffling and mysterious as volcanoes, and as creative and destructive as that too. And that's something that I feel like cartooners are such wonderful guides in kind of teaching us about what it means to prioritize love. And not just love, one of my favorite lines in the film is a line that says, "Understanding is love's other name." And I feel like that was such a compass for us in terms of the film and marrying kind of the scientific inquiry as well as kind of the romance. And I find that to shed a lot of light about humans and specifically Casper movies. And that if you have that kind of clarity of purpose and you're able to prioritize love, there's a pathway perhaps that opens in terms of what it means to live a meaningful life and also then die a meaningful death. And I think that's just, especially making this film during the pandemic, we were faced with tremendous loss in our own lives, uncertainty, fear, death hovered all around, and I feel like kind of that precarity of humanity and specifically how it relates with meaning and love was such a gift, and I think I'll just forever change because of that.
I mean, it's hard to follow that. I would say that the only thing I can add to it, possibly, just totally agree with you, is it matters who you go through life with, and that relates to love. I'm gonna cry because yeah, I mean, we've now worked together for 10 years, and I think that this was probably the hardest project we ever made in so many ways. Jocelyn and I moved in with Sara to edit this film.
So fun.
She really didn't have a say in it. We took over her house, and we ate a lot of chips and salsa, and did all the work while crying, and we had a lot of fun. And I think that it's just so rare when your experience making meaning, making films, and making a film like this really mirrors, this joy and camaraderie, like Empire of Love and love. And so I feel just incredibly grateful to have had that experience, and especially with Sara.
I'm feeling so emotional. No, it was a deeply collaborative experience, and I'm forever grateful. I really think of Erin as a sister in arts across, this is our third project together, and the artist, and there's so many stories of hilarity and challenge, and that collaboration, I'm so grateful.
Well, let's toast to that collaboration across the street. Let's give you guys everyone please both they're gonna love it. And thank you again, Sara, Erin, for being here.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you.
All of you.